I'm Johnny Sells, and I'm the artistic director of the Baroque music collective Solomon's Knot. You can't get any better inspiration than coming to the place where the man himself lived and where his music would have been bouncing off the walls 350, 370 years ago. Our keyboard player, William Whitehead, came to me and he said, I've got this idea for a project. I've been fascinated with George Jeffreys for many, many years. Nobody really knows his music, but there's something really special about it. He said, are you up for it? And I said, yeah, let's go for it.
George Jeffreys should be recognised now as a composer of real quality. Jeffreys lived about 1610 and died in 1685. He lives through that incredibly complicated, interesting period of English history, which involves the Civil War and the Commonwealth, and then, of course, the restoration of King Charles II. Our history of George Jeffreys is so closely entwined with Christopher Hatton, the owner of Kirby Hall. Musicians couldn't act as individuals at this time. They were totally reliant on the patrons. They were not autonomous artists at this period. So it seems he was working for Christopher Hatton in a secretarial capacity, also probably as a household musician, both in London and, we think, in Kirby Hall.
Christopher Hatton III inherited Kirby in the 1620s. It was built originally in 1570 to 75. At this time in England's history, pattern books are emerging from the continent, which are essentially books of designs taken from classical buildings. And in 1563, John Shute publishes one of the first in England. And only a few years later, we see the designs copied almost directly from that book here at Kirby. Christopher Hatton employed the architect Nicholas Stone, who had worked with Inigo Jones at the Banqueting Hall and other royal commissions in London. So these triangular and semicircular pediments he added. He also added the statue of Apollo, which you can see, which was, we know, cost about £4 from the contemporary records, which doesn't sound a lot, but actually was quite expensive. He also added features like the pergola, which is this balcony, again, sort of, and had not been seen in England before, but he added it here to really make a statement about how modern he was, how knowledgeable he was about the classical past and its architecture.
Hatton is clearly fascinated by the Italian style, so is Jeffreys, and what a wonderful thing that is that they encountered each other.
Christopher Hatton is a supporter of Charles I, and Charles I is not the most astute of monarchs, and he quickly gets embroiled with Parliament and with the religious affairs, which culminates in the civil wars. Charles I loses the civil war, and Christopher Hatton III is forced to flee to France, leaving his wife and family.
The imagery in these texts is so exquisite and full and just so pictorial, and that speaks of a kind of royalism. Of course, the people who are going to be listening to this music are of a certain intelligence, and they will understand the resonances and the imagery that's built into the metaphor that's built into the poetry, and therefore the music.
During the Commonwealth years, being a royalist and a High Church Anglican was not a good idea.
Cromwell shut down the theatres, cathedral choirs were disbanded. Of course, music kept going under the radar in, you know, little pockets here and there, and it's almost as if this music is even more painful and expressive because of that.
What I saw in this music was music written for the English church. That sounded to me like music that was written to Italian love poetry. Normally all of those painful clashes and those difficult sounds are being used to express the pain of love or being cheated or unrequited love. But this was being plugged into a completely different context, a religious context. And they're all speaking more or less on their own or two in pairs, throwing lines around between each other in this really Italian madrigalian style. And then suddenly all collecting together as a group and making one big group statement.
At the Restoration, Christopher Hatton was governor of Guernsey, and he made a mess of that. He'd been helping himself to the islanders' money, so poor old Hatton ended his life in disgrace, really. But I think that explains, when you take Christopher Hatton into account, why George Jeffreys was not at the centre of things.
To be able to record and perform this music in this space. And for us as the musicians who are taking this material and trying to bring it off the page, bring it to life, it's an absolute privilege to be surrounded by this absolutely inspiring and evocative building. You get the spirit of the age that Jeffreys was living in, the age that it was written in.